Welcome to With Love, The Chambers.
Where life, laughter, and lasting lessons meet.
We're The Chambers, a husband and wife navigating faith, family, and everything in between.
Here we share real stories, heartfelt conversations, and a whole lot of love. Because life isn't perfect, but God's grace sure is.
So pull up a seat, grab a cup of coffee, or go ahead and sip that tea, and join us for honest talks, laughs, and the wisdom we're learning along the way. This is With Love, The Chambers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is another With Love Wednesday. I am Jamila Chambers.
And I am Rufus Chambers.
And we are so excited to have you back in studio with us for this very special episode. And before we get into today's topics, we want to do something a little different to kick us off.
All right.
We had some questions that were given to us by our listeners and by our viewers. And so we wanted to just throw a question out. We have our, look what I have
note
here.
Card up in here.
My With Love note card.
Come on, questions.
To kick off the question for the day. And this question is from Damon B. in the Bay Area. Shout out, Damon B.
Come on now.
And the question from the floor is, how do we come up with our content that we talk about on our With Love Wednesdays, and how is it that we are able to keep this good conversation going with no script, no notes, no pre-meeting?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
Pray tell.
That is a great question.
You want to take that, or you want me to take that?
I'll throw it to you, and I'll add if you leave out anything. Great question from Damon.
No, that is a great question from Damon, and I feel like before we started this podcast, we had intentionally tried to up our communication game. So let's say that we were doing some work prior to launching this to get our communication channels open, right? And not just surface communication, but some deep, heavy lifting communication.
Yes.
And I feel like that helped us with this. So I will say that, number one. And then I think number two, both of us have talked about our lived experience. And then we've also talked about the lived experiences of people that we love and cherish most. And I think a lot of the preparation is trying to empathize with those in our sphere of influence. How can a conversation be had that we could either be a listening ear to them and share, or kind of turn the camera on ourselves and just share our life experience with the hope of helping, somebody. But I do go back to us investing some time, not only last year, but over the last 29 years of having a lot of deep and meaningful conversations.
And very selfishly, what I love about our conversations and about doing this podcast with you in particular is one of the things that we shared prior to launching this is that you and I have individually over the years done a ton of things. Mm-hmm. And you have individually developed and created a platform, Rufus Chambers Online.
True.
And I have created a platform over the years independently, which was then the Dream Studio.
That's true.
And this was our first time being able to do something together.
That's true.
And to be able to really invite people into the conversations that we have over the course of just our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And many of these conversations and stories are just a part of how we flow and how we get down privately. And the other thing that I'm excited about doing this about is that selfishly, I get to sit down with you 1 hour a week uninterrupted. And for those of you that know Rufus, when I say I get an hour a week of uninterrupted time to facilitate and to have this discussion with him in this podcast, albeit recorded, I'm going to take advantage of that because this brother is hardworking. In fact, on the way into the studio today, I know. Zoom in on that
Go
face.
ahead
On the
tell my business.
Yeah,
Go ahead and tell my business.
On the way into the studio today, I got to hang up a call, right, to come
Yeah.
in, because we are both always on the move,
That's
got a
true.
ton of things going on. And so to have this designated time just set aside once a week for us to sit down and have a conversation with each other, just selfishly,
Absolutely.
has been very nice and welcome,
Absolutely.
and something that I look forward to
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
So, Damon B, that's how we do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's how we doing it.
That's the
And we are
secret
praying,
sauce.
and we are yet praying.
Yes.
You know, and what I'll say is, you know, just let me do a little side commercial.
Yes.
I realize a lot of our conversations that we're having, they're fun-loving. We're talking about music. We're talking about things in a very casual manner. But please know that our faith is underlying a lot of what we're talking about, and our prayer petition is that through these fun-loving conversations, people are going to experience healing, people are going to experience freedom. That is our literal prayer petition, you know. So, you know, we hope that, and to be honest, we want to hear some of those testimonies.
Yes.
You know, we do want to hear some of those testimonies of how these conversations are helping some light bulbs go off in your own life, and just being a blessing to you. So I didn't want to miss the
Yes.
opportunity to say that.
No, and this is a great time to say thank you and to
Yes.
express our gratitude to everyone that has been on the journey with us thus far. Whether you are just finding us as a part of this episode, or whether you started all the way from the beginning or are binge listening. We found out we got some binge listeners this week,
absolutely.
on the way through. So we are excited, no matter where you are in the journey, for you to join us. And please submit your questions, and we'd love to find out what you're interested in, what you would love to have us explore even
Yes.
further, as we have these With Love conversations
Come
on
on.
Wednesday. We want to make sure that as an extended family, you are a part of the conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you ready to get into it? for
Go
today?
ahead. Go ahead. Why don't you set the table for our discussion?
Yes.
Because you came up with this topic, so I'm looking forward to hear you set the table.
I came up with the topic and the discussion that we're about to get into by first acknowledging the homegoing of our beloved Granny Dot. Dorothy Marie Chambers went home to be with the Lord just a couple of weeks ago, at the age of 103 years young. And if you knew her, you knew exactly what we mean by 103 years young, just 2 months shy of her 104th birthday.
Yes.
And so as we were celebrating her life and just thinking about the impact that she's had on our family and, quite frankly, just everyone that she's touched, one of the things that I was so struck by, number one, with her being our last grandparent to pass on, I was so struck by the benefit and the privilege that we have had of having these wonderful lessons from our matriarchs and our patriarchs in our family. We have been blessed to have lived with great-grandparents and grandparents that have just taught us some valuable lessons and really have had their thumbprint in their hand on our life. And we are still exploring some of those lessons even today. And many of them live to be in their 80s and 90s. And Granny Dot was 103. Grandfather Jay was 102. And so when you have the benefit of having that type of longevity and being able to transition these life lessons on to your children and your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, we have to find a way to bottle that up. And I thought there would be no better way to honor not only Granny Dot's life, but the lives of our all of our beloved patriarchs and matriarchs. We're just talking about some of those life lessons. And so I thought it might be a good place to start in terms of categories. And there's several things that we have learned from our grandparents. But let's just start with having a conversation about family.
Okay.
What have we learned about family, caring for family, putting family first, honoring family? what are some of the lessons that stand out to you that you have learned from our grandparents about that?
Wow, yeah. Specifically thinking about, Granny Dot and, praise God for her devotion.
Yes.
And we have literally been talking about her life over the last month or two. And, I think about the devotion that she had for her family, and then the devotion of our other grandparents regarding family was very, very important to them. You know what I mean? And when I say important, there was a conscious investment
Yes.
into the family. A story from, Granny Dot, and I've heard, my mom tell it, a lot was, her and my grandfather Rufus, they would host Sunday dinner, at their home, and they didn't have a big mansion. They had a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house that was maybe 1,000 square feet, and they would host dinner at their home, I think weekly. And, my Granny Dot, my grandfather was a widow, so Granny Dot was the new wife. And, my grandfather had, sisters and, and all of that. So I'm imagining her being the new wife with these stepchildren, with these in-laws, and you're trying to not only open up your home, but you're trying to serve them. You're trying to, be a blessing, in the life of that family. That's devotion.
Yes.
That is devotion. And, I have similar stories that I could, share about, my, my grandfathers and my grandmothers. I mean, they loved on one another in their way.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Bless Granny Bug's heart. She was a very frugal woman, but guess what? She was going to go to Macy's warehouse and get some gifts for her children
For
and
every single
grandchildren.
one. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? That was her way
Yes.
of loving. You know what I mean? And I'm kicking it over to you because I want, you to share as well. But if I was spending the night, at Granny Bug's house and Grandfather Jay's house, they wanted to check in. What do y'all want to eat? No, we wasn't going to go and get, a filet,
Yes.
from Ruth's Chris, but she was going to go to that grocery store, get a frozen pizza, and ask me, baby, you want me to cut up some hot dogs and put it on the pizza?
Now.
And guess what? I enjoyed a frozen pizza with some cut up hot dogs. That was her way
Yes.
of making a conscious decision to love on her family. You know what I mean? And Jamila, what about you? I mean, what are some memories that you have of your grandparents really prioritizing family?
Well, the biggest memory I have, and the thing that was really just dropping in my spirit now, was my beloved grandmother Noni.
Yes.
And Noni's name was Susie Johnson, but she was everyone's Noni. That was our term of endearment, the name that her grandchildren and quite frankly everyone called her when she got to a certain age and certain stage in life. And the wonderful thing that I learned about family from her was that she too had a blended family. Had several children, has 6 children that some of them married multiple times, and some of them brought other children into the family. She had neighbors and work colleagues that became family over the years. And one thing that was just absolutely stunning about her, and I didn't really appreciate it until I got to this stage in my life, was that everyone was family to her.
Wow.
And there was no steps, there was no halves, there was no qualifiers on how she described those relationships. And when you have upwards of 25 grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all these people, we would say to her privately, Noni, am I your favorite?
Yeah.
You know, which
Yeah.
one of us is your favorite?
Yeah.
And she would always say, it's the one that I'm talking to.
Wisdom.
It's the one that I'm talking
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
The one that I'm talking to is my favorite.
Yeah.
And she had that kind of personality. She had that kind of love that was just really infinite.
Yeah.
And that when you were talking to her and when you were in her presence, you felt like you were the most important person.
And that's a gift now.
It is.
Because not everybody can do that.
It is. You felt like you were the
Yeah.
most important person to her. And you were.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
were. And it was just remarkable that she had enough of that
Come on.
to give all of us.
Yeah.
And so I am just always touched when I think about that definition of family, having learned that definition
Yes.
from her.
Yes.
And then my
Yes.
paternal grandmother, Dora Wyndham, she had a wonderful way about her that was quieter,
Yes.
that was more reserved, and she showed love through her presence. And
That's
again,
good.
it's interesting the things you learn as you
That's good.
look
As
back
you get-
over
yes,
time and
yes.
as you age and as you mature.
Yes.
And so she wasn't the kind of person that had this really, really upfront personality,
Yeah.
but she had this very strong presence. And if you invited her, if you asked her to show up and asked her to be there,
Yeah.
she was absolutely going to
For
do
sure.
that.
For sure.
And so the impact of presence, and also too, my dad is one of 7, my mother is one of 6.
Yeah, y'all
also
got a big
having,
family.
you know,
Big family.
a huge family and,
Yeah.
and lots of children and lots of grandchildren, but being willing and have the capacity
Yeah.
to share your love through being present
Yes.
is something that
Yes.
I think back on when I think of what family means and just the love of family.
Yeah.
Coming from both of my grandmothers.
And you know, it's interesting. We're talking about family, and you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about part of the fruit of their legacy was how they handed down the critical nature of family to their children.
Yes.
You know, and we're the beneficiaries of that because
Absolutely.
your parents, I mean, they had a very high, or they have a very high creed of family,
Yes.
right? How they raised, you know, you, your sister, and your brother.
Yes.
And not only that, but how they love on their siblings. You know what I mean? And then I feel like the same thing, right? You know, my parents, same thing. You know, they handed it, I mean, they received it from their
Yes.
parents, and then they lived it out.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And you know, on my side, I even saw, you know, sometimes loving in uncomfortable times
Yes.
with parents or with siblings, right? You know, because it's just in them. You know what I mean? So and you know, thinking about, and that's and you know, audience, that's what we're doing. We're talking about these lessons from our grandparents, but we're also comparing them to the current climate of
Yes.
family, or the lack thereof. You know what I mean? And you know, we're not saying this to have an indictment, but when you look at those days and you look at kind of from whence we come, there are some stark changes, you know, and I think sometimes part of that is we are what our grandparents dreamed of.
Absolutely. 100%.
But in us living out and walking out their dreams, some of us have put down some of their practices. You know what I mean? And sometimes you and I know we'll get together with family, and you know, you're looking at some cousins you ain't seen in 5 to 10 years. It's like, there's no reason why we should not have seen each other before today, when there's been so many years that have
And if
passed.
so-and-so was still living, this wouldn't happen.
Exactly.
Right? Fill in the family member.
Exactly.
If the grandmother, if my grandmother,
Exactly.
grandfather, if that, we call them the glue.
Yeah,
If that particular family member was still here, we wouldn't be cutting up
That's
like
true.
this.
And yeah.
So
And
let
that's
me
true.
also ask you a question, because you tapped into something, and I definitely saw grandfather Ivory
Yeah.
so strong strongly exhibit this with siblings. I did not get the opportunity to meet Pops, which was the OG Rufus Chambers.
Yeah.
Rufus Chambers
Yeah.
Sr. Had passed away by the time I came into the family. But that conversation about extended family, siblings, and the collective,
Yes.
I think is a theme that you
Yes.
saw from your grandfathers.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
is a huge part of their legacy.
Yes.
And I think about Grandfather Ivory and his strong connection with his siblings in St. Louis, and Uncle Gus and Aunt Annie, and I mean they were tight.
Yeah, they were like peas in a pod.
Like tight, all the way up into very mature age.
Yeah.
And Pops, I would hear the stories about how he would take care of Big Evelyn and see behind her and make sure that the extended family was taken care of. And they also too came up in a time and in a generation where they migrated from different parts of the country to California.
You be sending for your people.
And you send for your people and all those things. So talk a little bit about that part of their legacy and the lessons of the collective that your grandfather certainly exhibited.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thinking about, my grandfathers, and again, I have three, right?
Yes.
Because
we love it.
Yeah,
we love it. We need all the extras.
For y'all that don't know, my maternal grandmother married twice, right?
Yeah.
And I had, praise God, a relationship with both of those wonderful, wonderful men my whole life. But, to your point, and when I think about my grandfathers, I just think about a level of devotion that was just consistency. You know what I mean? And I would see that in how they engaged, with their siblings.
Yes.
How they engaged with their wives, how they engaged, even sometimes with neighbors. You would just see this kind of, mother such and such up the street lost us, so I'm gonna go and cut the grass, or I'm gonna go pull her trash, or I'm gonna take something to the dump. It was just a looking after. And, and again, none of these men that I'm talking, they weren't wealthy men, but what they have, they would give. And we know that that's scripture.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And, I don't want to get into that, but again, they would give what they had access to. And, even with, some siblings, some siblings are going through or this, that, and the other. It's like, hey, we can kind of put something together. And even as I became a man, because that's another thing we could talk about, the secrecy within most black families, but that's something else. But, just hearing, oh yeah, grandfather wanted to give you X at this transition, but I talked him out of it, and again, it was and this is a memory. I remember my grandfather was over 100 years old.
Grandfather Jay. Yes.
When Granny Bugs went to be with the Lord, when she passed away. And as we know, Granny Bugs kept and I'm not trying to tell family business here, so
don't tell all the family business.
But, my grandmother was the primary financial brain behind, and over time they became wealthy, and sometimes I think they became wealthy unknowingly because of how frugal they lived. Grandmother passes away, grandfather's living in assisted living. And my mom, if she sees, she may have to correct me, but this is how I recall it. One of his first questions was, what happens to the money? And he was asking that, or what I understand, he was asking that through the lens of, can we now give what we've accumulated to the children? That's how it was interpreted. Or that's how I interpreted it. And it was amazing, as you're mourning your wife, you're living in assisted living, beautiful building, you're thinking about legacy. You're thinking about sharing what you have with family, you know. And grandfather was up in age now. You know, he had his mental faculties, but they surely were not what they used to be.
Sure.
But he had enough presence of mind to ask the family, and my mom was obviously the executor of the estate, what happens now? And I think it was just a testimony, you know, of how they looked at family. And again, I'm not trying to tell all the family business, but Grandfather Chambers, he passes away in 1982. He had enough presence of mind to create a scenario in which he would bless his wife, Dorothy, but at the same time leave an inheritance for his children. And that's what he did. That means you are thinking about family. And you're thinking about family not through a selfish lens. And I think sometimes that's what I get worried about in today's culture.
Yes.
You know, if you're thinking about family through your own self-serving POV, there's going to be some casualties, right? There's going to be some things that are dropped. And so those are two visions and images. And again, I think about Grandfather Ivory, you know, can't leave him out. He left an inheritance for his children and lived and again, these three men lived very, from at least my perspective, humble,
Yes.
meager lives. All the time, not forfeiting or squandering the inheritance. And that'll preach now. Now, if we was in church, that thing will preach right there.
Somebody be on the Hammond right now.
Come on. But that's what I saw.
Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yes.
Praise the Lord.
And so interesting in going on that track, because you have this conversation about legacy and what one leaves behind. We talked about these men being living below their means, and many of them not having education beyond elementary school.
Yes.
And so talk about, again, some of the lessons about the mindset, the thinking, the mentality of these three grandfathers in particular, to say, I didn't, and I don't even remember if Grandfather Jay got out of elementary school or not, but I come from a very meager educational background. Everything from a wealth perspective came through blue collar.
Yes.
I got the use of my hands type of employment, but there were some things, again, some principles that they put in play that I think allowed them to leave the inheritances and set the next generation up in the way that they have. And they both did it. It's not like they huddled up and talked about it, but to have these three examples of that. What was it that was a part of their mindset, the way they lived their life, the way they approach things that you think was a difference maker in that?
You know what? I feel like it was a generational thing, and it's just my opinion. You know, I think that the generation in which they came up in, you know, they were living through Jim Crow. They were living through the civil rights movement. So they were coming up in a time where I think they understood the assignment, you know, and the assignment was advancement. You know, the assignment was not social media. The assignment was not, oh, I want to go to Dubai and look fly. That wasn't the assignment. The assignment was, how can I advance the ball? And how do I do that? I work hard. I get along, I work hard, I do it again. I enjoy my family. Yeah, we're gonna drink our little drink on the weekend. We gonna put on
And they
some,
drank.
They drank. They gonna put on a little music.
Yes, they did.
They gonna dance in the living room.
Yes.
And when Monday morning come around,
I'm going to work.
I'm gonna do it again, right? Devotion. And when we think about family, I think the marriages, and I realize, one of my grandmothers, had, she married again, but there was a level of commitment. I think that was commonplace in that generation, and I think we would see that, we've seen that acted out in certain movies of that generation, say, hey, we gonna work it out. I don't think they were waking up with, I wish he would, or I wish she would.
Yep.
Mentality. In other words, I'm out if they do X, Y, and Z. I don't think that was easily arrived at, to split, and I think if we do the research and the data, I think it would validate that, meaning the divorce rate then versus now.
Sure.
So I think it was a devotion, and I think they understood the assignment. And, one of my favorite movies, is Raisin in the Sun. And in Raisin in the Sun, for those of you who haven't seen that movie, my favorite version is the one with Danny Glover. I just really liked his depiction, and there's one with Sidney Poitier. But, as Big Mama in the movie was coming into that money, her mind was focused on the family. She didn't see any world where her coming into any level of money because of the death of her husband was not going to impact blessing her whole family. And she envisioned, we need to move out of this neighborhood and this little apartment, and we need to go get a nice, beautiful home somewhere where my grandboy can play in the backyard. And I don't even know why I'm emotional, but I just think about that level of love and devotion that we've seen in our families, and those big mamas have went on. So I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna flip it to you, because this is something I thought about when I was eulogizing Granny Dot. Is, the Bible talks about a good person or a good man leaves an inheritance for their children's children. All of the grandmothers in your life, they've all went on, but they've all left you specifically with an inheritance. If you could articulate what has been left for you in their life, what would that be?
So the biggest thing that I would have to say, and I think about my grandma Dora with this, because when you were talking about advancing the ball.
Yeah.
My grandma Dora was 14 when she got pregnant with her oldest son, who is my Uncle Gene. And so as a 14-year-old, starting a family, and then going on to have a total of 7 children. Out of those 7 children, 4 of them have advanced college degrees. We have a dentist.
Come on.
We have an attorney. We have a DBA. we have my father, which so I always call them the doctor, the lawyer, the Indian chief, and the boss, right? They all individually were able to do this. My Aunt Eunice.
That's her legacy.
Yes, my Aunt Eunice. College educated as well. And so for her to have 4 of her children complete college. One, and Aunt Pam also had some college, and saying they're out of Oxnard, California, and Mama was 14 years old. And what kind of presence of mind did you have to have as a 14-year-old to say that my children out of Oxnard, California would go on and become something great in this world? And that their name would be great where they went. And so I think about that, and have had the benefit of thinking about that. Most recently, my dad, for those of you that don't know, my father is an identical twin. And my father, Jerry, and my Uncle Gary, turned 75 just a couple of months ago. And so we had the opportunity to gather with family, and they're telling all of these old stories. And I'm sitting around and I'm thinking, this 14-year-old girl had that kind of presence of mind.
Come on.
So that's a legacy, part of the legacy that I take from her in particular. I shared my Noni story, and that love thing is huge. Is huge with me.
Challenging.
It's challenging. That's a
big bar.
And it's challenging. That's a high bar. That is a high bar.
Absolutely.
But one that I'm happy to take on that challenge, because that's who she was. And if I had to say, if there's any way I want to be remembered, it would be if I get a half of that, I would feel like I did something in terms of how she's remembered today. I did not get the opportunity to meet my maternal great-grandmother, which was Emma Drisden, which was Noni's mother. I did not get to meet her, but she left such an impact and such a legacy on my life. She was the one that was the entrepreneur. So she had her own businesses as back in the 30s and the 40s. She used to, as they say, cook for the folks downtown. And my mother describes growing up eating steak and having these really extravagant meals, even though they came from poorer means, because Nana used to cook for the folks downtown, and whatever she cooked for them, that's what we had for dinner too. And so that entrepreneurial spirit, real estate, was always kind of forward thinking from an entrepreneurial standpoint. That was her. And then Grandma Irene, you didn't get to meet her. She also lived a long time in years. She passed away when I was a freshman in college. And Grandma Irene was, again, one of those, and that's Grandma Dora's mother. Grandma Irene, her legacy to me was, again, that legacy of love and extreme devotion. She used to sew each of us individual quilts and blankets, and my mother still has several of them. And so Grandma Irene left that legacy of just a tremendous amount of love in that way. And I did get to very briefly my Grandma Peaches, which is my maternal great-grandmother. She also was a tremendous entrepreneur. She passed away when I was quite young, but I remember eating tacos and chocolate cake at her house. And she owned gas stations in Bakersfield, California, with her husband, my great-grandfather Sammy, and they owned gas stations and mechanic shops, and were very entrepreneurial as well. So I think, again, some of those things that we just pick up as a part of our DNA, really, as you mentioned, were things and prayers and things that were spoken over us years before we existed. And they were things that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents walked out, that we get to live today, for sure. And I'll tell my story, because I know we're getting ready to wrap. I always tell this story privately when I think about Granny Dot living to be 103 years old and Grandfather Jay living to be 102 years old. And for those of you that are watching and listening, I want to be very, very clear. They lived. It wasn't that they just got by at those ages. They thrived at those ages. And I have been able to, I got a list and I'm gonna give it to y'all. So I'm gonna need y'all to pay attention to this list. I have a list and I'm going to give it to you of the things that we learned from our 100-plus-year-old grandparents that made a difference. Because here's the things they had in common. Number one, they loved Jesus, both of them. Were tremendous, tremendous people of faith. They were absolutely devoted to their faith. Grandfather came to his faith as a very mature man, and once he gave his life to Christ, that was it. Very, very devoted in their faith. The second thing, and I need y'all to get this, is that they didn't deal with no mess. If there was any strife,
you gotta explain that.
I will explain.
Okay.
You know, at the cookout when it get a little loud and somebody raise their voice. What Granny Dot gonna say? Oh, it's time for you to take me home now.
Because it was a mess of the family. But,
sometimes it be some mess. It ain't just our family.
They knew how to sidestep.
They knew how to sidestep it. You mentioned Granny Bugs being married for the second time, but her and Jay were married 60-plus years.
Absolutely.
Even though that was both of their second marriage, it was still 60-plus years. And after 60-plus years of marriage, if she started talking too loud on that phone and started saying something he didn't like to hear, he would retire himself up to the upstairs bedroom. He wasn't dealing with no mess. He protected his peace at all costs.
Absolutely.
And so I love that about both of them. That was the second thing they did. The third thing they did, both of them were avid readers. Both of them. And so Granny Dot would be a part of her Bible study at her church and would read. And she said, I'm going with the seniors. To read, not herself. I'm going with the seniors to Bible study. But both of them were avid readers. Grandfather Jay walked every single day. We would buy him a pair of walking shoes every Christmas because he was going to wear them out at the end of the year. And Grandfather Jay also ate, I call him his 4 square meals a day.
Come on.
Full breakfast, full lunch, full dinner.
You wasn't counting calories.
And then gonna have a big old hunk of cake or something for dessert after that. So definitely those are the things when I say, what does it take to be 100 and thrive? So both of them were in very excellent physical health, very mature in life, and Granny Dot lived alone till she was 99 and went into assisted living very late in her life. At her 100th birthday, stood up on her own 2 feet and
gave a speech.
Read a handwritten speech in her own handwriting.
Right.
So I'm talking about people that not only lived to be mature ages, but lived in a way that was just remarkable. Was really, really just remarkable.
For sure.
And so when I think about their legacy and what they gave us, what a gift of learning those lessons from them as well.
Absolutely.
Well,
Excellent summary. With that, you all, we're just going to thank you for tuning in to this very special presentation and discussion where we're really honoring, our grandparents who have all went on to be with the Lord. And we just want to say thank you for tuning in. We want to thank some of our contributors. Some of y'all asked about the tip jar that we were joking about in the last
It's not a
episode.
joke. We got a tip jar now. It literally started off as a joke. You're like, no, but we can get a tip jar.
Absolutely.
Like, what?
So we just want to thank our very first supporter, Elder Renee. I'm gonna call you out by name.
Call her by name.
Thank you for sowing into this work. Y'all, we pray and hope that you're enjoying these conversations. We are going to stay on our job of creating content that is meant to bless you, to make you laugh, to make you think, and to make you grow. With that, we're going to sign off from With Love, The Chambers, and we'll see you again next time. God bless.
This episode of With Love the Chambers is brought to you by the Vision Engineering Collective, where purpose meets precision. Whether you're launching a bold initiative, scaling your organization, or navigating complex projects, their team brings over 25 years of expertise in project management, strategic planning, and vision execution across sectors like tech, healthcare, education, and nonprofit. Ready to turn your vision into reality? Visit www.thevcollective.info to learn more.
That's a wrap for today's episode of With Love the Chambers.
We hope you laughed, learned, and felt encouraged along the way.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs a little love and wisdom today.
You can also connect with us online on all social media platforms at Rufus Chambers Online and at Jamila Chambers. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time,
Keep living, keep laughing, and keep learning with love, the Chambers.